Yes, and Japan in some senses is experiencing something similar to Europe. But I think, and again I would commend Japan on the approach they've taken. They've really had to deal with, because Japan, Korea and others have had lower numbers for a longer time, they've been dealing with spikes and flare-ups for months now. Japan has already had a number of flare-ups and spikes going back 2 or 3 months, and has managed to contain those by localized measures very often, and really focused on very powerful, very strong cluster-based investigation. And they've gone after each and every cluster. They've examined each of those clusters in terms of the epidemiology, and they've identified the sort of risk behaviours associated with the generation of those clusters. The other thing Japan has done is really looked at who is transmitting the disease. And the majority of people in the Japanese context do not transmit the disease to another person. And in fact, it's a smaller number of individuals who are transmitting disease to others, and very often that is driven by the context in which the transmission occurs. Crowded spaces, places, closed spaces, areas where there's close contact settings, the kind of nightclubs, social gatherings, churches and other situations. And by doing this, Japan is really starting to pick apart transmission inside Japan, looking for those highest risk behaviours, looking for those highest risk environments, and then taking action at that level, locally, surgically, trying to reduce those activities, close down those spaces that are most risky, and then dealing with that step by step by step. So I do think Japan deserves a lot of credit. Certainly in the data that I've seen, I've not seen another country in reality that's produced as much really granular information on what's going on cluster by cluster by cluster. And, you know, for me, when a country and when an authority truly understands the nature, type and local levels of transmission, and once you understand the problem at that level, that gives you a huge opportunity to intervene. And it means you can intervene in a way that's not so brutal, does not have to be so population-based or widespread. Bruce, you spent time looking at this in China and other places. I mean, I don't know if you have observations on Japan and what they've been doing.
I think, Mike, to the point you made, the response in Japan, like so many countries, has been extremely impressive. And but the question comes back a little bit to the last question, what's the virus trying to do? And like Maria said, the virus is trying to get from person to person. And what we can do, we need to make it more difficult for the virus. It's as simple as that. We're not making it hard for the virus. We're coming together, we're clustering, we're coughing over each other, and everybody needs to be asking themselves all the time right now in the face of a globally endemic virus at this point, am I making it more difficult for this virus to pass from one to another? It's as simple as that at the end of the day. And like Mike says, everything we talk about, finding the virus, isolating the cases, tracing the contacts, it's all about making it more difficult for the virus. This is not rocket science. This is simple, but it takes a certain amount of discipline and it takes a certain amount of commitment by a global community now to stop this thing. But it's definitely stoppable, and we definitely have the knowledge and the tools already to be slowing it down a lot more than we are.
Maybe just as well, and I think what Japan has also done is not simplified, but really distill the public messaging down to something that people can really get a hold of. They speak very much about, in terms of transmission, they talk about avoiding the 3 C's, the closed spaces, the crowded places, and the close contact settings. So people really are triggered to really look hard at them when they get themselves into those situations. And when they are in those situations and they can't avoid those situations, they're given 3 more instructions, you know, open the windows for ventilation, minimize the conversation, wear a mask. So I think we can learn a lot from because people are overloaded with information, and we're all, you know, it's a deluge, it's a tsunami. And I think governments could really look at how do we, not simplify, simplification is the wrong word because it sounds like you're dumbing it down. You're not. You're really trying to distill down the key behaviours that are going to protect you and protect others. And I think if you want to avoid, if you believe your main mode of transmission is clusters, and that's what's happening in Japan, and you want to stop clusters, if you believe that most people don't transmit the disease but do in these particular situations, then you want to reduce risk in those situations, and you want everybody reducing risk in those situations. And then you try and give the simplest, most implementable message. Don't give me instructions that I can't follow. Give me instructions that I can follow, and I think people are crying out for that. And I think Japan, you know, no country is perfect in all of this. Japan has had its struggles, but I do think Japan deserves a lot of credit for the science-based approach that it has taken to this response.
Just to add, so we have quite a lot to say for this answer. Just to say on that last point that Mike just mentioned on this science approach, this data-driven approach, I think one of the other things that we've learned from Japan and many other countries is the ability to be more specific, to be more targeted based on data. So one of the things that they've also looked at is within these clusters, they've noticed a shift in the age in the populations that are actually being infected. This is driven by nightclubs, it's driven by social contexts and the way that people crowd and come together. And by knowing that, you could target your approach. You don't have to have a blanket close everything down. You can actually focus on where is this virus liking to circulate? Where does it like to circulate? Where can we close that down? And that data-driven approach is really, really critical. We've said before, and that not everyone necessarily passes the virus to somebody else. We could prevent that from happening, but there's some